The credit system does not punish most people because they are irresponsible. It punishes them because it measures them on the wrong day. That is the first thing I would want you to understand. Most people think credit works like morality: use the card, wait for the bill, pay the bill in full, do it every month. If you were responsible, the system should reward you. If you were reckless, the system should punish you. That is the story ordinary people carry around in their heads, and it sounds fair enough to be believable. It is also incomplete enough to cost them points every single month, because the credit system is not really watching your virtue, it is watching a snapshot. That is the real story here, not some magical loophole, not some trick the banks do not want you to know because it would destroy their empire. The deeper truth is much more mechanical and much more useful. Your credit score is not mainly responding to the fact that you eventually paid in full. It is responding to what your bank chose to report when the bank chose to report it, and what your balances looked like on that one reporting snapshot. That is why responsible people get blindsided. They are playing one game, the scoring model is grading another. The file you gave me makes this point very clearly. A person can use a card heavily during the month, pay it in full by the due date, pay zero interest, never miss a payment, and still see a score drop if the statement closed while the balance was high. That sounds unfair when heard emotionally. It is not really unfair, it is just structural. The bureaus are not following your account in real time. The bank sends them a monthly picture. And that picture often gets taken before your payment ever arrives. That is the hidden machine. And once you understand that machine, the whole subject becomes easier to respect and much harder to misread. I've always believed the public gets hurt most when it mistakes delayed systems for moral systems. The credit model is full of delay. It does not especially care how responsible you felt. It cares what got reported. It does not care that your checking account had the cash all month. It cares what the statement balance looked like when the cycle closed. That is why so many people think the system is broken when the system is actually doing exactly what it was built to do. It is not rewarding clean intent. It is scoring visible risk. That is what utilization really is. Not a judgment of whether you pay eventually. A judgment of how heavily you appear to be leaning on available revolving credit when the snapshot is taken. And because the snapshot gets taken before the due date, the entire ritual ordinary people were taught, wait for the bill, then pay it, is often too late to influence the number that mattered most. That is why I say the beginner's mistake in credit is not overspending alone. It is misunderstanding the calendar. Now let us talk about why that one number matters so much. The scoring model is built on 5 broad categories, and right behind payment history sits amounts owed. In practical terms, that means utilization. Nearly a third of the score is shaped by how much of your available credit is showing as used. Not how much you used at some point emotionally, not how much you intend to pay. What shows that distinction matters because people assume the system sees effort, the system sees ratios. It sees a $2,000 balance on a $5,000 line and reads 40% utilization. It does not pause and say, but she has the cash in checking and always pays before interest. It reads the number. Then it translates that number into perceived risk. Higher usage suggests dependence. Lower usage suggests control. Whether that interpretation feels fair is irrelevant. That is how the machine behaves. This is why the file is right to emphasize the statement closing date instead of the due date. That is the date most people ignore because the banking app does not scream it at them. The due date gets the spotlight because that is where fees and interest become obvious. The closing date gets buried because that is where your score gets decided more quietly. Banks are helping you avoid late fees. They are not especially focused on optimizing what the bureaus see on your behalf. That is your job, and if you do not know where that date lives, you are letting the system choose your photo day. That is a dangerous way to move through credit. I want you to imagine 2 borrowers. The first uses the card heavily, waits for the bill, pays in full every month, never pays interest, feels proud of being responsible, and cannot understand why the score keeps bouncing around. The second uses the card just as heavily, but 3 days before the statement closes, he pays most of it down, leaves a tiny amount, lets that tiny amount report, then clears it by the due date, same spending, same full payment, same zero interest, completely different photo. That is the whole game, not your spending morality, your reporting optics. This is why I find the phrase credit score loophole both useful and misleading. Useful because it captures attention, misleading because there is no loophole in the legal sense. You are not beating the model. You are finally understanding what the model was always measuring. And once you understand that, the system stops feeling arbitrary and starts feeling mechanical. Mechanical is good. Mechanical can be controlled. The file says it well. You are not cheating the system. You are just cleaning up before the camera clicks. That is the most accurate sentence in the whole topic. And it also exposes why so many people lose points unnecessarily. They believe the due date is the camera. It is not. The closing date is the camera by the due date. The picture was already mailed. That is why timing changes everything. Now let me go one layer deeper, because this is where good credit becomes great credit. Most people eventually learn the broad principle, keep utilization low, fine, that helps. But low is not the same thing as optimal. The public loves broad rules because broad rules are easier to remember. Under 30% is fine, under 10% is better, good, useful. But the file points toward a more precise truth. The people with elite scores do not usually report zero across everything. They often report a very small intentional balance, somewhere around 1 to 6%, and often on only one card. This is where the all zero except one method becomes so interesting. The reason it works is not mystical. A scoring model wants evidence that you use credit and manage it well. If every card reports zero every month, the profile starts looking inactive. That is not fatal. It is simply not ideal. If the goal is to optimize the amounts owed category as hard as possible, the model scores behavior, no visible behavior, gives it less to praise. A tiny balance on one card and zeros on the rest says something far more attractive. I use credit. I do not depend on it. I control it. That is a beautiful message to send a scoring model, and it is worth understanding that this has nothing to do with paying interest. That is where many people panic. They hear leave a balance and assume that means carry debt. Number the balance is reported on the statement. It is then paid by the due date. Interest is avoided. The point is not to revolve debt. The point is to report activity without reporting strain. That is the difference between carrying a balance and letting a balance report. One costs interest. The other improves optics. Now let us talk about the problem most people do not see coming. Per card utilization, the public hears overall utilization and relaxes too soon. They say, I have $50,000 in available credit, so one card being high should not matter much. The system does not see it that way. Individual cards matter. A single low-limit card that reports nearly maxed out can still drag the score, even if the total portfolio of credit lines looks tame. That is one of the nastiest little realities in the whole model, because it means a person can be globally careful and locally sloppy and still take the hit. Again, not broken, just structural. That is why credit literacy is not only about 1% across all cards, it is also about where the stress is showing. This is why I tell people credit scores are not mainly about debt. They are about visible dependence. A person who uses a huge percentage of one line looks needy to the system, even if that need is temporary and fully fundable from cash. The scoring model is not trying to read your intentions. It is trying to guess your vulnerability. That is a very different exercise. Once you accept that, the score becomes easier to influence because you stop taking it personally and start treating it like an algorithmic impression. That is what it is. An impression and impressions are managed through presentation. Now, let me say something else the file handles correctly, and that almost nobody appreciates enough. Utilization has no memory in the older models most lenders still use. Late payments can stain you for years. Utilization resets. That is an extraordinary feature once you understand it. It means this category is not some old scar you carry forever. It is a monthly opportunity. Fix the reported balance and the score can respond quickly. That is one of the most useful parts of this whole system, because it means tactical behavior can produce near-term results. The file notes that FICO 10T is starting to track trends over time. Yes, fine, worth watching. But the practical present reality is that most lenders still use older models where the monthly reset matters enormously. That means this remains one of the few score factors that can be improved quickly if you know what number controls it. That is why I think of utilization as the easiest category to optimize once the calendar is understood. The hardest part is not the math, it is obedience. Can you actually build the ritual, find the statement closing date, set the reminder, pay down the balance before the snapshot, leave the right small amount, clear it by the due date, repeat. This is simple. It is also the kind of simple people ignore because it does not feel dramatic enough to matter. Simple is where most financial improvement hides. The file also warns about something I think deserves much more respect: credit cycling. This is what happens when a person repeatedly hits the limit, pays it down, spends it back up, and does it again within one cycle. People do it because they are trying to make a small line act larger than it is. The system often interprets that behavior as suspicious review. Freeze closure, that is not the outcome a person seeking score improvement wants. And this point reveals a larger truth. Sometimes the best credit optimization move is not a timing trick. It is a structural one. Ask for the higher limit. Higher limits make dollar utilization easier by default. That is a very powerful lever because the less often you live near the ceiling, the less you have to manage the photo. This is one reason I think the cleanest credit profiles are often built, not by performing every month in panic, but by constructing enough limit room that ordinary spending naturally reports as low usage. Timing still matters, but room matters too. The more breathing space you have, the less one grocery run or one travel charge turns into a visible strain signal. That matters a lot. Now let me speak more broadly about what this whole topic really reveals. Credit systems are not trying to decide if you are a good person. They are trying to estimate whether you look risky. Those are different projects. Good people can look risky. Messy people can look controlled for a month. The score is not your moral report card. It is a lending risk proxy built from delayed snapshots and weighted categories. Once you understand that, you stop being offended by it and start learning how to work with it. That is where the power begins. Because power in money almost always begins the moment you stop demanding fairness and start understanding mechanism. That is true in taxes. It is true in investing. It is true in credit. The people who win do not necessarily love the system. They simply understand what it is actually measuring. This is why I appreciate that the source finally comes back to process instead of hype. Find the closing date, set the reminder, make the manual payment, leave 1%, pay the rest by the due date. Do not rely on autopay for the pre-closed part. Autopay was designed to save you from late fees, not to optimize the number reported. That is one of the most useful practical distinctions in the entire file. People think automation solves everything. It does not. It solves timeliness after the statement exists. It does not solve optics before the statement exists. Those are different jobs. That is why people who do everything responsibly by the ordinary definition can still keep getting suboptimal outcomes. By the scoring definition, they are solving the wrong date. Now let me add one caution, because every useful system gets abused by people who hear only the exciting part. Low utilization does not fix bad credit by itself. If the real profile has larger damage sitting underneath it, collections, charge-offs, late payments, errors, those problems live elsewhere on the report. Utilization strategy is not a resurrection machine for every broken file. It is one powerful lever inside a larger system. That matters because a lot of people will hear this and think they discovered the one move that explains all outcomes number, but they did discover one move that explains a lot of unnecessary score drops. And that matters plenty. If I had to compress the whole subject into one sentence, it would be this. The credit system rewards the borrower who looks safest on the statement closing date, not the borrower who merely feels most responsible by the due date. That is the entire secret. Once you understand that, the confusion stops. You stop asking why your score dropped even though you paid in full. You stop fearing normal card usage. You stop treating the due date like the most important day. You stop reporting zeros everywhere just because zero feels morally clean. You stop accidentally letting one maxed out small limit card poison the whole profile. and instead you start managing the photo, that is the whole game, not gaming the system, managing the photo. The system was always going to take anyway. That is why I find this subject so revealing. It teaches a lesson much larger than credit in financial life. There is often a big difference between being correct in substance and looking correct in the metric. Sophisticated people learn to respect both. The credit score is only one metric, yes. But if that metric controls your borrowing costs, your approvals, your insurance pricing in some contexts, and your financial options, then learning how it takes its picture is worth a great deal. And all of that comes back to the same brutal truth. If you do not control the timing, the bank controls the story. I would rather control the timing. That is the side of the equation I prefer to stand on. And now that you understand the calendar, you can too.